Ladies and gentlemen, today we step into a world many people never see. The world behind closed doors, where a woman lives with a narcissistic husband. From the outside, everything seems polished, the smiling photos, the perfect social image, the appearance of a stable relationship. But inside those walls, the truth is different. It is a life shaped by emotional manipulation, silent suffering, self-doubt, and the quiet erosion of identity. This speech is not just about struggle. It's about truth, courage, boundaries, and the power a woman finds when she chooses to stop abandoning herself for the sake of keeping the peace. This is a story of reclaiming voice, strength, and inner peace. Behind closed doors, the world changes for a woman living with a narcissistic husband. The warmth he shows outsiders fades the moment the door shuts. What the world sees, charm, confidence, charisma, is reserved for everyone except her. Inside the home, the atmosphere becomes thick with tension, uncertainty, and emotional instability. She begins each morning unsure of which version of him she will encounter, the affectionate partner who showers her with compliments, or the cold critic who dismantles her self-worth piece by piece. Narcissistic abuse rarely begins as loud chaos. Instead, it starts quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. It grows from small dismissive remarks to a complete rewriting of her reality. And because these shifts are so gradual, she often doesn't recognize the severity of the situation until she is deeply entangled in his emotional web. A defining aspect of this hidden world is the constant monitoring of her emotional responses. A narcissistic husband studies her behaviors the way a scientist studies patterns. He learns what scares her, what motivates her, what breaks her spirit. And then he uses those insights to maintain dominance. She begins to shrink parts of herself to avoid conflict. She learns to quiet her needs, to apologize for things she didn't do, to predict his reactions before she speaks. Her life becomes a performance, carefully scripted to avoid triggering his anger, criticism, or withdrawal. Even neutral conversations feel like negotiations. A simple question may be interpreted as disrespect, a different opinion framed as disloyalty. Slowly, she finds herself walking on emotional eggshells, fearful of invisible lines she doesn't even know she's crossing. One of the most painful aspects of narcissistic abuse is that the world outside the home never sees it. To outsiders, he's respected, admired, and even adored. He appears as the successful husband, the devoted partner, the man who would never hurt anyone. This social persona becomes her prison. Whenever she tries to express her pain or seek support, she is met with disbelief. But he seems like such a good guy. This invalidation reinforces the narcissist's control. She begins to question her own perception. Maybe she is overreacting. Maybe she is too sensitive. Maybe it is her fault. The isolation deepens because the abuse is invisible, camouflaged behind a socially impressive facade. The contrast between how he treats her privately and how he behaves publicly becomes psychological torture. She loses trust not only in him, but in herself. Another layer of this hidden reality is the emotional unpredictability that defines her daily life. Narcissists thrive on instability because instability keeps their partner off balance. One moment he praises her, telling her she's the best thing that ever happened to him. The next moment he devalues her, saying she's ungrateful, weak, or incompetent. The dramatic shifts create emotional whiplash. She holds on tightly to the brief warm moments, believing they reflect his true self, and convinces herself that the cruelty is temporary. This emotional push and pull deeply conditions her. The rare moments of affection become rewards she desperately waits for, like emotional oxygen in a suffocating environment. What she doesn't realize is that this intermittent reinforcement is one of the strongest psychological traps. It keeps her emotionally attached, even as the relationship drains her spirit. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of living with a narcissistic husband is the gradual disappearance of her authentic self. She may have entered the relationship confident, expressive, and full of life, but behind closed doors, she slowly becomes a version of herself shaped by fear, doubt, and silence. She stops laughing as freely. She stops sharing her opinions. She stops reaching out to people she loves. Her world becomes small, centered around his moods, his demands, and his need for control. She learns to anticipate danger even when none is present because emotional injuries have trained her nervous system to be on high alert. But deep inside her, beneath the layers of hurt and exhaustion, a quiet truth remains. She knows something is wrong. She may not yet have the words for it or the strength to name it, but she feels the internal fracture between the life she deserves and the life she is living. And that awareness, no matter how faint, is the beginning of her path back to herself. The erosion of a woman's identity in a relationship with a narcissistic husband doesn't happen overnight. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. In the beginning, she doesn't even notice it because it often feels like love. He praises her choices, admires her strengths, and celebrates her uniqueness. But over time, those compliments turn into subtle criticisms disguised as concerns. Maybe he comments on her appearance, suggesting she could try harder. Maybe he questions her decisions, making her feel incapable. Maybe he jokes about her in ways that sting but are framed as just teasing. These moments are small at first, easily dismissed. Yet each one chips away at her confidence. Every time she adjusts herself to avoid his disapproval, a piece of her identity softens, bends, or disappears entirely. A narcissist gradually reshapes the woman's world until her entire sense of self revolves around him. His moods, his preferences, his expectations. She becomes hyper-aware of what pleases him and equally aware of what triggers his irritation. Her energy shifts from expressing her own needs to managing his reactions. The hobbies she once loved begin to feel unimportant because he dismisses them. Her friendships fade because he finds faults in the people she cares about. Her dreams feel impractical because he frames them as unrealistic. What she doesn't see is that each concession, each silence, each compromise that violates her inner truth slowly dismantles her independence. She becomes a version of herself sculpted by his desires, not her own. As her identity erodes, so does her self-worth. Narcissistic husbands often use alternating cycles of praise and criticism to keep their partners emotionally dependent. When she does something he approves of, he elevates her, making her feel valued. But when she fails to meet his unspoken expectations, expectations that constantly shift, he withholds affection, belittles her, or emotionally punishes her. This unpredictable system conditions her to believe that her value exists only when he acknowledges it. She begins to tie herself, esteem to his approval, forgetting she ever had an independent sense of worth. Over time, she internalizes his criticisms so deeply that she begins to speak to herself the way he speaks to her. She apologizes excessively, second-guesses her choices, and questions her abilities. She stops trusting her intuition. The erosion of identity also shows up physically and emotionally. Her body carries the weight of constant stress, tightness in her chest, heaviness in her stomach, trouble sleeping, chronic exhaustion. Her emotional world becomes muted. She stops feeling joy in the things she once loved. She feels guilty when she takes time for herself. She feels ashamed for wanting more. and she feels responsible for maintaining a relationship held together by fear rather than love. Even when she senses that something is deeply wrong, she doubts her own judgment because he has trained her to believe that her perception is flawed. She begins to think, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am hard to love. These thoughts are not reflections of reality. They are reflections of manipulation. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of identity erosion is that she loses sight of her own voice. What once came naturally, speaking up, setting boundaries, expressing desires, now feels dangerous or pointless. She becomes silent not because she has nothing to say, but because she has learned that speaking invites emotional punishment. Her silence becomes her shield, but it also becomes her cage. She stops recognizing the woman she sees in the mirror. Her reflection feels foreign. Tired eyes, forced smiles, a quiet sadness underneath. Yet even in this deeply wounded state, there is a spark within her that refuses to die. It is the part of her that remembers who she used to be. It is the part of her that aches for freedom, authenticity, and peace. And though her identity may feel fractured, it is not destroyed. It is waiting patiently for the moment she decides to reclaim it. The manipulation cycle in a narcissistic marriage often begins with a powerful stage called idealization. In this phase, the narcissistic husband places the woman on a pedestal so high that she feels chosen, special, and deeply valued. He showers her with affection, compliments, grand gestures, and promises of an extraordinary future. He mirrors her personality, her dreams, and even her vulnerabilities, making her believe she has finally found someone who truly understands her. This phase feels intoxicating because it creates emotional intensity and deep connection, though it's built on illusion. Idealization is not love. It is a carefully crafted performance designed to gain her trust, devotion, and emotional dependency. It is the foundation of the cycle, ensuring that when the darker phases unfold, she will cling to the memory of who he pretended to be. Once she is fully invested, the narcissist subtly shifts into the devaluation phase. Here, the warmth that once defined the relationship begins to disappear. Compliments turn into criticisms. Curiosity turns into judgment. Support turns into blame. The change is so gradual and confusing that she struggles to understand what she did wrong. He may point out flaws in her appearance, intelligence, or emotional reactions, often framing it as helping her grow or being honest. Emotional intimacy, once abundant, becomes scarce, replaced by coldness or irritation. He may compare her to others to weaken her confidence. He may begin withholding affection, making her feel undeserving. This stage is designed to destabilize her, to make her question her value, her choices, and her ability to maintain the relationship. She becomes emotionally hungry, desperate to return to the warmth of the idealization phase, believing that if she just tries harder, it will come back. The cruelest part of the manipulation cycle is that the narcissist often alternates rapidly between affection and cruelty. One moment he is gentle, apologetic, or unexpectedly loving. The next, he is dismissive, accusatory, or emotionally distant. This unpredictable pattern creates a powerful psychological trap known as intermittent reinforcement. In her longing for love and stability, she holds on to the few moments when he treats her kindly. Those moments become emotional rewards, convincing her that the good version of him still exists beneath the cruelty. But those warm moments are not signs of real change. They are strategic resets in the cycle designed to keep her attached. She believes she is fighting for the relationship when in reality, she is fighting for a fantasy he uses to control her. At the center of the cycle lies control, the true goal behind every manipulation. Control is not always loud. Sometimes it is whispered through guilt, subtle through gaslighting, or disguised as concern. He may control her by isolating her from others, making her doubt her memory, twisting her words, or shifting blame onto her. He may insist that he understands her better than she understands herself, convincing her that her emotions are irrational or excessive. Control can look like approving or disapproving her decisions. It can look like monitoring her time, her friendships, her goals. It can even look like creating chaos so that she relies on him for stability. Control is the backbone of narcissistic abuse. Not love, not connection, but power. What makes the manipulation cycle especially damaging is the way it reshapes her emotional world. The highs of idealization and the lows of devaluation create emotional turbulence that keeps her tethered to the relationship. It becomes difficult to leave because she believes the cycle is temporary and that the compassionate man from the beginning still exists somewhere inside him. She tells herself he is stressed, misunderstood, or hurting, and that if she is patient enough, supportive enough, or loving enough, he will return to the man he once was. But the truth is that the cycle is intentional. It is not an accident, nor is it something she can fix. The manipulation cycle is crafted to break her confidence, exhaust her spirit, and keep her emotionally dependent. And the longer she stays trapped in it, the more she forgets that healthy love does not require suffering, confusion, or self-abandonment. The turning point in a woman's life with a narcissistic husband often begins quietly, almost like a whisper inside her that refuses to be silenced any longer. It rarely arrives as a sudden burst of clarity. Instead, it grows from small moments, moments where the gap between who he pretends to be and who he truly is becomes too wide to ignore. She begins to notice patterns she once overlooked. The rehearsed charm he displays in public contrasts sharply with the cold dismissal he gives her at home. The way he laughs with others but criticizes her every move starts to feel less like stress and more like a strategy. She begins to sense that something deeper is wrong, even if she cannot yet name it. This awareness is the first fracture in the illusion he worked so hard to maintain. Awareness deepens when she starts reflecting on how she feels rather than how she is supposed to feel. She notices the constant anxiety that shadows her day. She notices that she apologizes even when she has done nothing wrong, that she tiptoes around his emotions, that she feels like she has lost the vibrant parts of herself she once loved. She starts asking questions she never dared to ask before. Why do I always feel responsible for his anger? Why do I feel smaller every time I speak? When did I stop feeling safe with the person I share my life with? These questions are powerful because they create emotional distance from his narrative, from his manipulation, and from the belief that she is the problem. Awareness is the moment she stops absorbing the blame and starts seeing the truth. Sometimes the turning point is triggered by an event, a particularly cruel remark, a public humiliation, an explosive argument, or a moment of emotional abandonment that cuts deeper than anything before. Sometimes it's not an event, but the cumulative exhaustion of years of trying to fix something designed to remain broken. In that moment, she feels her spirit reach a limit. She sees that no matter how patient she is, no matter how gentle, loving, or forgiving, nothing changes. She realizes that she has been living in a cycle engineered to keep her small. And with that realization comes a painful truth. The person she needed him to be, the person he pretended to be, never truly existed, This recognition shatters the illusion, but it also frees her from the fantasy she has been holding onto. As awareness grows stronger, she begins to reclaim parts of herself that have been buried under years of emotional manipulation. She starts trusting her intuition again. She starts recognizing that her needs, feelings, and boundaries are not inconveniences. They are valid. She may begin seeking support, even quietly at first. She might confide in a trusted friend, read about emotional abuse, or learn about narcissistic behavior patterns. Each piece of information empowers her further. She starts to see that his behavior is not normal, not loving, and not something she deserves. She learns that love is not supposed to feel like fear. It is not supposed to require self-erasure. And slowly, she begins to imagine a life not free of him, but free of the emotional cage he built around her. The turning point is not always dramatic. It can be as simple as a moment of stillness, where she finally admits to herself, I am not okay. That acknowledgement alone can be revolutionary. It becomes the first step toward reclaiming her autonomy. She begins to detach emotionally, even if she is still physically in the relationship. She stops believing his excuses. She stops absorbing his insults. She begins to see the manipulation as manipulation. And once she sees it, she can't unsee it. The illusion collapses, the spell breaks. And though she may not yet feel strong enough to change her life, she is no longer blind to the truth. Awareness becomes her quiet rebellion, her beginning, her doorway to the possibility of freedom. Reclaiming power after years with a narcissistic husband is not a single moment of bravery. It is a series of small, courageous steps that begin with acknowledging her own worth. At first, these steps feel unfamiliar, even frightening, because she has been conditioned to believe that prioritizing herself is selfish or wrong. But as she begins to see the truth of her situation, she realizes that reclaiming her voice is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of survival. The process starts with the quiet recognition that she deserves peace, safety, and respect. It begins with the understanding that her needs matter. She is no longer willing to live in a world where her emotions are dismissed or her identity is defined by someone who thrives on her silence. This awakening marks the beginning of her return to herself. One of the most powerful steps she takes is learning to set boundaries. For years, she has walked on emotional eggshells, adjusting herself to avoid conflict. Now, she begins to understand that boundaries are not walls. They are limits that protect her well-being. Setting boundaries may look like saying no without guilt, refusing to accept blame for emotions that are not hers, or insisting on being spoken to respectfully. It may look like disengaging from arguments designed to provoke her, or walking away from conversations that twist her words into weapons. At first, boundaries feel intimidating because she knows they will trigger resistance from him. A narcissist sees boundaries as threats to control. But each time she holds her ground, she strengthens her sense of self. Each boundary becomes a quiet declaration, I am worthy of dignity. As she strengthens her boundaries, she also begins the long, tender process of healing. Healing is not linear, and it does not happen quickly. It unfolds slowly as she relearns how to trust herself. She may seek therapy, read books, talk to support groups, or share her story with someone who truly listens without judgment. Through these moments, she realizes how deeply she had been conditioned to minimize her pain. Healing requires her to face the wounds she has tucked away, the moments of humiliation, the years of gaslighting, the emotional neglect, the trauma of feeling invisible in her own home. Yet with every truth she acknowledges, she takes back a piece of her power. Healing becomes an act of reclamation, a return to the woman she was before the abuse tried to rewrite her identity. Self-compassion becomes essential in this process. For so long, she was taught to show compassion to everyone except herself. Now, she learns to speak to herself with the same gentleness she once used to calm storms in her home. She learns to forgive herself for staying longer than she should have, for loving someone who used her vulnerability as leverage, for believing the lies he crafted to keep her small. She begins to understand that her choices were shaped by survival, not weakness. Compassion brings softness into a life that has been hardened by emotional warfare. It allows her to feel her emotions fully: grief, anger, relief, confusion, without guilt. It teaches her that healing is not about forgetting what happened. It is about freeing herself from the shame that never belonged to her. Finally, reclaiming power means building a new life, one where she no longer navigates around someone else's emotional instability. She begins dreaming again. She reconnects with people who genuinely care for her. She rebuilds her independence, piece by piece, sometimes slowly, sometimes boldly. She rediscovers her interests, her talents, her voice. She learns what love is supposed to feel like: not fear, not confusion, not conditional acceptance, but safety, respect, and emotional freedom. She realizes that leaving a narcissistic relationship is not the ultimate victory. The victory is becoming a woman who no longer abandons herself. Her story is no longer defined by what she endured, but by the strength she found within herself. And though the journey is long, she rises, more grounded, more self-aware, and more powerful than she ever imagined. As we close this journey, I want to honor every woman who has lived this reality, not the version the world sees, but the truth she carries quietly within her. Living with a narcissistic husband is not just a difficult relationship. It is an emotional battlefield where she has had to fight for her sanity, her dignity, and her sense of self. And yet, despite the manipulation, the fear, the confusion, and the slow erosion of her identity, she finds within herself a strength she never knew she had. Her courage is not loud or dramatic. It is found in every moment she chooses honesty over illusion, boundaries over silence, and self-worth over fear. The journey out of narcissistic abuse is not defined by one moment, but by countless small choices to reclaim her voice. She begins to see through the lies. She begins to trust her intuition. She begins to recognize the difference between love and control. And most importantly, she begins to believe that she deserves peace, not maybe, not someday, not if she tries harder, but now, today, exactly as she is. Healing is not about escaping the past. It's about refusing to allow that to define her future. There is profound beauty in watching a woman rebuild her life after years of emotional captivity. She steps into the world again, not as a fragile version of herself, but as a woman who has learned her own power. She carries scars, yes, but she also carries wisdom, depth, and an unshakable understanding of her worth. She no longer seeks validation from someone who never planned to give it. She no longer shrinks herself to make someone else comfortable. She no longer apologizes for existing. She knows who she is, and she refuses to let anyone take that from her again. And so, to every woman walking this path, you are not alone. Your story is real. Your pain is real. Your healing is real. The world may never fully understand what you endured behind closed doors, but you do. And now you are rewriting the story. You are choosing yourself. You are stepping into a life where your voice matters, where love does not come with conditions, where peace is not a distant dream, but a right you reclaim every single day. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your freedom.